Hi, people. I was going to say I hope you're enjoying the weather, but it's for those of us with lighter hair, it's not the most comfortable of conditions. Um, I want to talk about the ITV Tory leaders debate because, of course, it's more than just the leader of the Conservative Party. It will be our 56th Prime Minister. Tomorrow, it's going to whittle down to two candidates, and then from there, the members will choose between those two. If I were a betting man, I would say it's most likely going to be Sunak versus Mordaunt. That would be my gut feeling, with Truss coming in third. What I want to do here is just talk a bit about tonight's debate um, and some of my thoughts around it. A disclaimer: I'm not a member of the Conservative Party. I've never voted Tory in my life except one occasion where I voted for a Conservative police commissioner, but otherwise I've never voted Tory. There are things I fundamentally disagree with conservative thinking, um, but there's also a lot I agree with them on. Um, so that's just the context. I'm not saying this as a Tory member, so I won't have a vote. But I'm interested. I'm interested in who will be our next prime minister. It's also worth mentioning that in this country we don't directly elect prime ministers, unless of course you're a member of a party that happens to be in government. Rather, what we do is we elect the governing party. So the Conservatives won the most votes. They had the right to govern in 2019. That's how the democracy works. Um, in my lifetime, I was thinking about this earlier. Of the seven prime ministers in my lifetime, only two have left office from losing a general election. That is John Major and Gordon Brown. The other five, Thatcher, Blair, Cameron, May, and Johnson, all resigned. And of course, Johnson still has a month and a bit left. So that's a more common exit. The thing about a general election, I'll just say this very briefly, is I've often wondered, in this country, it's quite like the general election's done in the day, and then you have the winning party, and the leader of that party then goes to the Queen um, to form the government. It's all. I just wonder about the practical side of it, i.e., the occupant of number 10. If they've lost, do they move out on the same day? And I'm just wondering about the practical side of that with removal vans and everything. It seems very rushed. I remember during the Blair Brown handover, it just seemed a bit kind of like Tony Blair and his family going to a train station, and I don't know. It's just there must be some practical mechanism around that. I imagine from Downing Street staff, i.e., if a prime minister feels he or she is probably going to lose, will they pack in advance? I don't know. So tonight's debate, it's down to five candidates: Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt, Kimi Badenoch, and Tom Tugendhat. Honestly, I don't think any of them are terrible. That's a more positive note, because often people start an analysis like that with honestly I think they're all out of touch, or honestly I honestly think none of them are terrible. I honestly think, looking at those people, they all look prime ministerial. What I mean by that is I don't think any of them are totally incompetent. I think they're all intelligent people. I'm not looking at any one of those candidates and thinking we'll be in a real mess if they're in power. That's not how I feel. Um, there are some people on the fringes of politics I would certainly feel that way about. But of course, that isn't enough. It's about policies and it's about a whole lot of other things. I'm not going to go through the debate like piece by piece. I did miss the first 5 minutes. Um, so I'm just going to say a little bit about how I felt each candidate came across. Sunak was kind of the man to beat because he's got the most parliamentary support, so he's sort of being seen as a candidate to beat. Rishi Sunak's a very polished politician. In that sense, he's in the same sort of mold as Tony Blair and David Cameron. He's very smart. He's very polished. That's not entirely a good thing because sometimes people can read that as being a little bit too polished. Um, I kind of want to know, what does Rishi Sunak get angry about? What really drives him? He sometimes seems almost a little bit too cool. and calm. I mean, it's no bad thing, but sometimes I do wonder, well, he's kind of like a factory line politician. He's very polished, he's smart, he's capable, but what moves him, what angers him, where's his drive? I do wonder about that. Um, I also wasn't overly impressed by his answer on China. When that was brought up, there was a point where the candidates could ask each other questions. I think it was Liz Truss put him on the spot with that. And he gave kind of, I wouldn't say totally evasive, he answered the question, but he gave this kind of political answer about, well, I would listen to um the committee report that we both were on, Liz, and I would listen to MI5, but I just felt it lacked a sense of momentum. Now, if I were a would-be prime minister, I would be saying, well, actually, I take the China issue very seriously. I feel there is major trust issues with Beijing, and I would be a leader who would confront it. That's what I would say. And I think Sunak, frankly, came across as a little bit weak on that. It was just a little bit political, a little bit, um, I wouldn't say indirect, but it just felt a little bit, it lacked any spirit. By contrast, the other candidates, I think all of them, in fact, came across as strong on that issue. I suppose Sunak's thinking about the point of view of the chancellor. The question was actually, would you still trade with China? Here's the thing, of course, it's very difficult to completely cut off trade with the world's second biggest economy. It's probably impossible. But a leader of a nation, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has to be assertive and tough enough to actually stand up to our adversaries. And if Beijing isn't an outright enemy at the moment, it certainly isn't a friend. Um, and we have to be a little bit careful that the focus on Russia doesn't distract us from what China's doing, not just the human rights issue, but actually the fact that they do pose an external threat. And I feel Sunak was, it's one big question mark I have about Rishi Sunak. What is his foreign policy? I mean, I just wonder about that. I'd like to see him being a little bit more outspoken on those issues. Liz Truss, I think she's been a very strong foreign secretary. I wasn't impressed by her answer the other night. I thought it was very evasive. But she has been a tough foreign secretary, and she certainly has stood up to Russia. There was a question about would you meet Putin at the G20. They all gave a tough answer, including Rishi Sunak, to be fair. They all gave a tough answer when it came to Russia. I mean, a tough narrative. But Truss said that it's better for voices of the free world to stare down Russia and tyrants like Putin. The problem is, as Kimi Badenoch said, this has been tried time and time before. Putin has had chance after chance with Western leaders to try and be reconciliatory and have a good working relationship, and he just said you wouldn't waste your time. And I think that's actually the right approach at this point. As Macron's uh, failed attempts have shown, you can't reason with someone like Vladimir Putin. He's just I think he's a tyrant. I think he's out of control. Only yesterday, his regime was ordering Russian generals to step up attacks in Ukraine. It's evil what the Russians are doing there, and we need a prime minister who doesn't equivocate on this. But to be fair, I think they all came across as tough. If that was posed to the Labour Party, Starmer's more or less got foreign policy right, but I think there's a suspicious number of people within Labour ranks who I would question in terms of patriotism and in terms of would they be really forceful enough. Not so much Keir Starmer, I think he's got that right, but I don't think we can equivocate when it comes to Russia. And I think it's one thing that Johnson got right, his support for Ukraine. Um, there was one point Kimi Badenoch said that we need to stop focusing on Brexit. We need to move on. Now, the moderator, Julie Etchingham, said, but this is unfinished business as a Northern Ireland protocol. But I actually find that refreshing for Badenoch because I'm tired of hearing about it. She's right about that. One could be forgiven for thinking it's the only thing the Tories care about. And I'm tired of this notion of who's a Remainer, who's a Leaver, this constant sort of focus on Brexit, because the whole thing is we left. That's Yeah, there may be unfinished business, and those issues are important. Certainly, the Northern Ireland Protocol is very important. But I do know what she was driving at, which is people are tired of it's divisive, pitching the Tories against one another, pitching the country, the wider public, who's a Remainer, who's a Leaver. Um, I'd say there's two things. There are those hardline Brexiteers who they're purists, like the slightest hint, for example, even someone like Liz Truss, who has been solidly, pro-Leave, even though she voted Remain, but she's shown her Leave credentials, not enough for them. So there's those purists. Then there is those Remainers in the country who, can't accept democracy, and they want another referendum. And much like a Scottish nationalist, they just want to keep doing this until they get their way. Um, I really don't like referendums. I think they're divisive, and I think if they have to be done, they should be once in a generation. I just think it's too early to really, really know, the legacy of Brexit. What else? Tom Tugendhat, well, he came across well. He made this thing about himself being an outsider. There was a little bit of a rift between him and Badenoch. She said, well, it's all very well saying those things, but you need to have proven them. I.e., it's all very well making proposals, but Tugendhat has no cabinet experience. No one can accuse him of not serving his country. I mean, he served in the most profound way possible, and arguably in the armed forces, so the Penny Mordaunt. But it is true that Tugendhat hasn't had cabinet experience. Badenoch a bit more. She was a qualities minister, but I think they both have a problem. Actually, Mordaunt as well. All three of them are technically political lightweights. In the case of Penny Mordaunt and Kimmy Badenoch, they were ministers. But in the case of Penny Mordaunt, it was for a short period. She was Britain's first woman defence secretary, but it was for less than a year. And that wasn't even in this administration, it was in the May administration. Um, so I think that could be an Achilles heel of Tugendhat, Badenoch, and Mordaunt, the fact that they're not backbenchers, but they are certainly not the political heavyweights that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are. On the other hand, that could actually work in Tugendhat's favour, the fact that he is an outsider, particularly Tugendhat. He's the only one there that hasn't been a minister. Um, I hope that whoever wins, they will appoint at least some of the others into their cabinet. Because I think those people can be capable. Now, this does not mean I'm suddenly become a blue Tory. There will be a lot of things I disagree with them on, absolutely. But honestly, what I like about the Tories is the fact that certainly the fact that they're anti-woke. I like the fact that you have strong minority women like Kimmy Badenoch taking on this nonsense and saying, actually, this is a great country. We're not a racist country. I think that's refreshing. I think it's empowering, and I think it's a good thing. Taking on identity politics, the um, the issue of transgender pronouns, all of that. The Guardian actually had a piece, on all the leaders. This was before it was narrowed down a bit their stance on culture wars. I have to say, for the left to pontificate on that when they have pushed it so hard is pathetic. Um, Whoever wins, no doubt I will have issues with some of their policies. I don't think you can ever get a government that you'll completely agree with. I don't think there'll ever be a leader you completely agree with. I do think Tom Tugendhat's right, though, that there probably needs to be a fresh start. Um, but I don't think he's going to win. I don't think Kimmy Badenoch's going to win, simply because although they might be quite popular with members, I just don't know if it's enough. I don't think enough members will support them. I think if I was to very loosely speculate, I'm going to say Penny Mordaunt is probably going to be our next Prime Minister. I mean, Sunak was a bookmaker's favourite. I think a lot of his parliamentary colleagues will feel he's the strongest candidate. I certainly think he'd be a capable Prime Minister. I think there's just a slight unease about his this perception that he's not in touch. Is that entirely fair? Maybe not. I mean, I don't think the man should be judged simply because he's wealthy. That's kind of reverse snobbery. And as Chancellor, he did give support to businesses. But I think he did come across a bit out of touch in the debate when he said, he's pushing for tax breaks later on when a Mordaunt, stepped in there and said, well, actually, people need it right now. And she made that anecdote about, real people struggling. I think Sunak can come across as a bit out of touch. Um, and that's a problem. I mean, we have to remember he was elected by his constituents. So, he must be a good constituency MP. But to the wider public, I think he might come across as a little bit, I don't want to say elitist because that has connotations, but just can he really understand people's struggles? I think some of the other candidates probably can. I think Penny Mordaunt made the point that the public will see this as sort of a sideshow, and she was quite assertive in saying that it's not about us. But that's, well, quite easy to say that. Of course, it's about them. Of course, you're ambitious, Penny. I mean, there's no point denying it. That's a very politician's answer. It's not about me. It's about you. Amy Badenoch said the same thing. Anyway, if you watched it, what did you think? I'm not worried. I honestly think any one of these five people is capable. I'm not thinking, oh, I really, really hope she or he doesn't get into power. That's not my feeling. But I do feel, of course, there will be areas I differ with them on. What I'd like to see, I'll just briefly mention the two front runners because they're the people most likely to get into number 10. Rishi Sunak, I'd like him to be a bit more forceful in foreign policy. What I mean by that is I'd like him to be a lot more outspoken on Russia and China. His voting record's all right, but I just think he's not outspoken enough. And I want to know what makes him angry, what drives this man, because he seems a little bit polished in the sense of, I don't know, just what drives him. Penny Mordaunt, I guess my thing about her would be there's a little bit of an unknown quality about her. She looks prime ministerial. People are saying she's got a Thatcherite thing. Well, they've said that about every female Tory since Margaret Thatcher. So it's, every ambitious woman Tory since Margaret Thatcher. So I don't, they said it about Patel. They said it about Truss. I think that could be a little bit overdone. Um, I also think, they have to be careful not to come across as the nasty party again. The Tories have come a long, long way, and I think David Cameron deserves some credit for that. But I say that, but of course, the big society, his so-called big society, the truth is, it was divisive, and the poorest and some of those struggling most in society were being hit very hard by those cuts early in the Cameron administration. And I don't think a lot of people in this country will have forgiven the Tories for that. I think there is still a perception, rightly or wrongly, that this is a party that, if they're not all for the rich, they certainly, some would say they're for the rich. So I want to see these candidates also speaking out more against big energy companies. To have the courage to do that. Jimmy Badenoch said something interesting about working with unions. Um, so I wouldn't say any of them come across as particularly hard right, at least not from this debate. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. That's my take.